Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Vanguard Productions. Today, we are here for another episode of Movie Trade. This is a show where Donovan and I exchange movies every few weeks, usually something I've seen that he has not seen, and vice versa. And today, we hit the nail around the head with that with two creepier, ominous, dark films, a complete juxtaposition of our first episode. But before we get into it, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing pretty good, man. Yeah, I think we both had a lot of fun on that first episode of Movie Trade, talking about musicals. Rough finishing there, calling those
Yeah.
movies musicals. Uh, but yeah, I'm glad that we're doing this again, and that we're also again in a similar theme here, right? That wasn't the original intent with the show that they'd
Mhm.
be movies that mirror each other, but we've got a couple creepy thrillers that get under your skin.
Yeah, today we're talking about Watcher and Funny Games 2007. And I guess general thoughts on both before we dive into Watcher here. Dude, what did we think? Was this another another, I should say, another episode of Movie Trade where we both liked the movies above like a five out of 10, I should say, excuse me.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I liked. I mean, I love Watcher. That was my pick for a reason. I'm
Mhm.
really into that movie. Watched it over the pandemic. Got under my skin in all the right ways. I think it's great. And then Funny Games, which I hadn't even heard of until you picked it for this episode. I liked quite a bit. I think it's a good movie. It's one of those where even saying I liked that or I enjoyed that feels
Yeah.
it feels weird given the actual subject matter in the
Yeah.
film. Definitely a more confident like than I gave Song to Song, which was like teetering on that
Mhm.
border. But
Exactly.
Funny Games, I was it's a good movie.
Yeah, I think both of us were keeping the streak alive here. I enjoyed both quite a bit. Obviously, I recommended Funny Games, so love that
Mhm.
movie. And Watcher was quite a surprise, especially on the first initial viewing of it. That first half, so effective. It hit all the nerves of things that I'm personally afraid of. And yeah, with that, we should just get into it, dude. Chloe Okuno's Watcher. So, yes, yeah, tell us a little bit about your experience, your first watch of this, and how it's aged and why you recommended it.
Yes, so Watcher came out early last year, maybe like mid-year in 2022, and I watched that at home, just on my computer. I hadn't heard much about it. I knew it got some festival buzz, and I think some of the film people I follow tweeted about it. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And it was a Shutter joint actually, which surprised
Mhm.
me because I love Shutter, love horror focused platform. The ratio of like good to bad on there is definitely something to talk about. So we're like, okay, they got something good out. I watched it, and this movie just creeped me the hell out. Obviously, it's about a couple. They move to Bucharest. There's a bit of a language barrier there. Husband's working a new job. Wife, played by Micah Monroe from It Follows, which we love, is our protagonist. Again, like I said, language barrier. She can't really communicate with people very well, but like she's got somebody across her apartment in the building across the street that just stares at her, watches her, as the film is called,
Mhm.
uh, out of that big picture window, and it's just this silhouette, this human figure that just stands there, and it's very simple but very unsettling, very creepy. I think everybody can relate to like the uneasiness of feeling like you're being watched or followed, and the movie's just kind of like a slow burn build of that anxiety and stress of like she's out at the grocery store and like dude's just standing there and she's like, wait, like who is that? There's a killer on the loose in the city. While this all happens, like kind of like in the background, there's a serial killer named the Spider that's targeting young women and severing their heads. So you've got that like kind of looming over the plot here, and it just kind of all builds to a pretty wacky and wild finale. And I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, it's to get into like what I really enjoyed about this movie. I think the direction and cinematography just unbelievably strong, especially those perspective and point of view shots from the apartment looking in and looking towards the watcher. And we're gonna
Yeah,
spoil this movie, both movies, I should say, before we get
yeah,
too deep into it. Yeah, that anticipation, even when they finally like reveal the watcher's face, I think the slow build to every I don't want to say scare, but I guess every situation that she's in, the awkwardness of it, of the unknowing. Am I going crazy, or is this actually happening in this foreign place? And obviously, their customs are a bit different. For example, like later on in the movie, when she gets like face to face with the Watcher, the cops just like, okay, it was a misunderstanding. You guys just shake hands, and we don't have to do anything about it. So she's like a fish out of water in this situation that is just unbelievably strange. And I think the movie and Micah Monroe herself, her performance definitely elevate this thing above your standard stalker horror movie.
Yeah, there's something so torturing about feeling truly helpless, right? And obviously, the fish out of water contributes a lot to that. She doesn't know anybody, can barely speak to anybody. But even like you mentioned, right, where there's a scene where the stalker or alleged stalker is brought to her front door by the police and is like, "Hey, like you're harassing this dude. Apologize to him, shake his hand." Like just textbook gaslighting there. And then
Yeah.
even her own significant other, Francis, her husband, like even he isn't fully on her side. There's a dinner scene where she kind of learns that he's been like cracking jokes to his
Hmm.
coworkers and colleagues about the fact that she's like paranoid and living on the edge. And in that moment, like she has nobody. There's no one. Like she's not going home to her parents' house. There's no like best friend that she can go hang out with. Like she's just kind of at the whim of whatever is happening to her. And there's something just so deeply sad about that as a viewer where
Yeah.
you're just like, you are helpless, truly. They do a really good job of setting that up, I think.
Yeah, I think their whole dynamic is one of the more interesting things about the film, though, because he speaks English like perfectly well, obviously, but he also speaks the language and she doesn't. There are many times where she's like listening in on a conversation, just like gathering bits of it rather than the whole thing, and it kind of puts you as an audience member, because most of the time they don't give subtitles with that in this film. It kind of puts you as an audience member in her shoes as well, being like, okay, what's going on, and try and just infer these situations. I also think I believe his name is Carl Glussman. He's great in this movie, and he's
Yes.
definitely one of the underappreciated working actors today. Whenever they need someone to fill in the husband or the ex-boyfriend role, we've been seeing him a lot in movies as of late, and I quite enjoyed him in this too. I thought he was really good.
Yeah, he's great in this. I think that duo's great, and then I also want to give a shout out to Bern Gorman, who plays the
Yes.
titular Watcher. He's a silhouette for a good chunk of this movie, but you do eventually see his face. And no disrespect to Bern Gorman, he's a seasoned actor, been in a lot of stuff, but like he has like the look, like he has that
Oh,
creep factor
absolutely.
going. He looks like a weird little fucker that would be like down the hall, and you just like whenever he's in the hallway with you, just look over your shoulder an extra time. So I think pitch perfect casting there. And boy, there are some like blood curdling moments in this movie, even
Mm,
before the big reveal when you get like the payoff and the answer. But like they do the thing where the whole movie's like shining a spotlight on this guy, like he's the one, like he's the killer, he's doing all this evil
yes.
shit. And whenever a movie does that, you're like, okay, we're doing the red herring thing. There's going to be some okey doke. It's going to be somebody else. And you kind of get that moment, right, where they say, oh, the spider's been caught. She has to shake hands with this dude lives across. I think his name is Daniel that lives in the other apartment. And you're like, okay, so maybe it isn't him. Maybe he was like the red herring. And there's a scene on the subway where it's just them
Yes.
two in the car, and he's got like the grocery bag. And looking at the bag, you can see just roughly what looks like the silhouette of a head
Mm,
inside the bag, and it's so like shit, it's so disturbing, dude. That shot fucked me up so bad when I watched this movie for the
yeah.
first time because as I mentioned, the serial killer is severing heads. We didn't mention Irina, which is the name of her like next door neighbor acquaintance who goes missing conveniently like halfway through the movie. They can't find her. They go to her apartment, not there. Boyfriend can't find her. Uh yeah, that moment is just so disturbing and got under my skin so good and kind of sets up the finale. But I'm curious to ask you because you've said a couple
Mm,
times to me now that like the first half of this movie is such a good thriller. First half of this movie does this that. I'm curious at
yeah.
what point in the movie does it make that turn for you where it's like, okay, this is less impactful than it was early on.
See, this is the thing, and I hate hyperbole, so I'm gonna be very careful with what I say, but it definitely takes a big dip for me after that subway scene, and I'm not sure if that's
Yeah,
because then the movie's plot is just that simple. Because it almost feels like for a lot of that first half that they're building to something more. And one of the rules about reviewing movies is that you should never rewrite the movie. I'm not gonna try
yeah,
to here, and that's not necessarily impacting my score on it, but I do feel like they're building to something that seems far more, I don't want to say convoluted because it could be a good plot point as well, but just something more vast than just that. And I think there's a beauty in that simplicity of it just being that. And I think his performance is so good that it makes up for that element for me. But I think by the end, like the last like 10, 15 minutes of this movie, it's very intense, but it becomes something so generic when it wasn't before, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Yeah.
No, that's fair. It's definitely one of those movies where, like, the ending ends up being what the most likely thing was from the beginning, right? Like, when
Yeah.
they set it up, it's like the most likely thing is, okay, yes, this dude is obviously stalking her. He obviously is the killer they keep teasing, and he obviously is targeting her. And all those things do end up being the case. I think that for me, there's a sort of relief, which seems like a weird word given what she goes to at the
Mm-hmm.
end there, but some sort of like cathartic feeling to the fact that she was right. Because the whole movie, it's like
Yes, for
being
sure.
gaslit by her significant other, by other people in the city, law enforcement, everyone's telling her like you're crazy. She's being gaslit in this foreign nation. So when you get the reveal that like, no, no, she was right. Everything she was saying was correct. She wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
I did feel like a sense of relief there. I'm like, yes, like, oh my god, come on, like let's get this fucking
Mhm.
dude. They do confirm that it was Irene that was killed. She goes to investigate her apartment when there's like more music playing, sees her
Her
severed
head's
head
gone,
there.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really fucked, and then she gets the bag over her head. He slits her throat, like when there's a scene
Yeah.
where she's in the apartment and like she hears her significant other in the next room, and he just cuts her throat. I'm like, are they gonna kill Mike and Monroe at the end of this movie?
Yep.
Which for me, I was like, holy shit, I don't know how I'm gonna feel about this movie. It just ends with Daniel killing her, getting away with it, and just moving on to the next woman. That would have been a really, really bleak ending.
Bleak, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, she does the whole thing where she plays dead. He walks out into the hallway, and then she shoots him from inside the apartment. Which I
Yeah.
like that little set piece. I think the reason it doesn't bother me as much is because it isn't very long. Like they don't string that out too long. I
Fair,
think
yeah.
in another world, that ending could have been 30 minutes, right? Where like he's in the apartment for days and he's like feeding her dog food and has her like mouth duct tape shut. And they like that
Yeah,
they could have made that a whole thing and had it be the entire third act, but it's so like a 15-minute sequence there. It's pretty open and shut. But
yeah.
I do agree with you that like the height of the intensity and stress and anxiety is that subway scene where you're pretty sure he's got like a fucking head in the bag in
Yeah.
the train. But yeah, good points.
No, yeah, and I still even love, like, the last shot of that movie because it is exactly what you just mentioned, where it's like, her husband looks at her and she's like, it's basically the "I told you so" moment, you know? And that's
So good.
just so satisfying after everything this motherfucker's put her through this entire movie,
Mhm.
most definitely, yeah, and I think it's hard, like I said, it's not a movie that I think is bad in any way. I just think it lessens, especially in rewatching the clips. I mentioned to you today that I was rewatching some of it in preparation for this. And I
Mhm.
think in rewatching it, knowing exactly where it ends up, it does lose that wow factor even in that first half.
Yeah, that's totally fair, and I agree with you on the last shot. I think that the fact that she doesn't say anything, like in the movie
Yeah.
ends before she speaks, I think was
Yeah.
such a good decision. Again, in another movie, she would have been like, "I told you so," or "What do you think?" Now, some like cheesy one-liner than like smash the credits. I think it's way more impactful that she just gives them the knowing look, like, "Yeah,
Hmm.
this is what was going on. I was right."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it is an interesting point though about repeat viewings kind of losing a bit luster there. And I won't even disagree with that because I do think it's a movie that benefits from just going in like, hey, this is a stalker movie, and then just
Yeah.
kind of letting it work its way into you.
Yeah. I think another thing I'm realizing as we're talking about it too is I think the movie's shift into that final act also included what I remember being a lot more score and music too, whereas the first half of it feels so like reserved and quiet and lets you like sit in the just like super uncomfortable moments of like, for example, her walking through the grocery store. I know that that scene has a bit of score to it as well, but just how it is underneath the scene rather than trying to elevate the scene. The scenes are scary enough as they are, you know what I mean? Like everyone is on their A game performance wise, and I think the direction is super solid too. And I think that's just one of those things where it comes down to the editing room and what's gonna sell and what's gonna scare normal general audience. You know what I mean? And I totally agree though that this is on the better end of Shudder's original
Oh yeah.
films,
Oh yeah.
without a shadow of a doubt in my mind.
Mhm. Yeah, and one more thing I want to give a shout out to this movie for before we do eventually move on to funny games is the
Mhm.
cinematography.
Yeah,
I think this movie looks gorgeous. Just
stunning movie.
the wide shots looking out that apartment window. You got the tiny little gold square with the dude standing. I think when she's catching the subway, there's a really like gorgeous shot there of her just kind of standing, waiting for the bus to come. At the theater, there are a lot of like
Even when she's
great,
following him, I loved that whole
yeah.
sequence, the way that was shot too.
Mhm. A lot of good cinematography here, and then for Chloe Okuno, this to be her first, feature film, I think,
Yeah.
I did not know that. When I was watching this movie, I would have thought that was somebody's 6th or 7th, feature film, so definitely some high points there
No,
to get.
definitely a filmmaker I'm going to be on the lookout for going forward, because listen, we need more movies that get the subtlety. And while I did mention that it doesn't always nail that, I think it nails it better than the majority of new releases nowadays do for a
Mhm.
long duration of time throughout this runtime. It's a shorter movie too, you know.
Yeah. Mhm. Yep, yep.
Yeah. So
Well,
wrapping up our thoughts on that one, what are we gonna give Watcher?
ooh, okay, that's a fun one. I forget, did we do 10-point scale or it's
Oh
5-point
man,
scale?
this is gonna be so tough to just try and remember this. You know, for the sake of posterity, let's just give them both. You know, hit them with the decimal system if possible.
Okay. If that's the case, then I would go for me, Watcher, I would say 4 stars, so 8 out of 10
Yeah,
would be my go. I
I
enjoyed
think
quite a bit.
yeah, during the viewing and like that first day or so, like after watching it, I was like a high six, like low seven on it. I think now
Mhm,
I'm probably gonna settle at like 3 stars, 6 out of 10. It's a movie I'll
mhm.
definitely recommend to people, especially those that might be fearful of more violent horror fare. I feel like this one,
Yeah,
although the ending does get a little bit
yeah, like,
bloody for
got us
sure. I think
notice.
that for the most part, it definitely just plays on your own human natural fear of being followed. I think it does a great job of doing that. It's a good movie.
Mhm. It is indeed. And with that, do we move over to Funny Games US?
Yeah, man. Funny Games U.S. or Funny Games 2007. Michael
Yeah.
Haneke's remake of his own movie,
His own
uh,
movie.
which personally I don't know about yourself, but this is like the only time I'm sure there are multiple cases of this. It's the only movie I've seen both versions of it from the same director. I'm not sure how many directors have done this before.
It has to be a very low number. I think we
Yeah.
mentioned this to each other off camera too, though, like, that has to be a thing that's happened, like, 5 times, and somebody remade
Yeah,
their own film. Obviously, countless film remakes, and a lot of times people come back to produce or supervise, but to be in the
exactly.
director's chair is a very interesting decision, and boy, this is, this is a doozy, dude. I watched this
Yeah.
movie while I had COVID, by the way. I was sick as hell when I watched this movie.
Yeah.
Like, I rented it, watched it, and it is again, I also went in knowing nothing about it other than, like,
Mhm.
the only thing I knew about the movie was that on the poster, there was, like, a bloody golf club. So I was like, "Alright, this movie's gonna go places." And, of course, it opens, Naomi Watts, Tim Roth go into their vacation home, the golf club, obviously, everything's very bright and pretty. They're guessing classical music, which I'm
Yeah.
like, they are really painting that picture. This is like your good old American family, upper middle class, maybe lower high class, really, uh, white bread family. They get to their vacation home, and it does not take long for shit to
No.
get out of control of this movie. I was not expecting
I mean,
the way
even
this
even
thing
in that
goes.
sequence of them like guessing the music, the title card comes up and it's immediately like this heavy metal song. They're just like screaming like nonsense, and you're just seeing them like talk like in the background during this whole thing as the credits are going, and it sets such a strange tone. I think before we get too deep into this, I do want to kind of talk about my exposure to this movie and how this tied
Yeah.
into my love of the movie, and how I want to know about your first viewing of this movie. When I first saw the trailer for this, I was quite young, and it left a
Ooh,
huge impression on me. Obviously, Brady Corbett and Michael Pitt as these two young
dude.
frat boy, like preppy looking fellas rolling up to this house is like an image I'll never forget. And the trailer seemed very exciting. It seemed like a thriller type movie with a lot of high stakes, high energy. And even the beginning of the movie kind of tricks you into thinking that. And then as you're watching it, you're realizing this is not the kind of movie that this usually is, in the sense that it's not very satisfying for our protagonists, for our heroes, for lack of a better word, for those on the innocent side of morality. It is not a very pleasant story, and we are meant to sit in moments post violence rather than witness these violent moments. And I think that's, on this first viewing, what definitely stood out to me and left the biggest impression. But I'd love to know, during your first viewing, dude, what was kind of going through your head, especially like these fourth wall breaks, which I'm sure we're gonna get into in a second here.
Dude, oh my god. Alright, I'm just gonna start from the top, right? So you mentioned
Yeah.
the smash cut to the heavy metal music breaking up the classical, like 2 minutes in at the title card. At that moment, I was watching this movie, I'm, like, wrapped in my blanket, I'm like, "Uh-oh." I'm like, "This is gonna be one of them ones. This is gonna be
Yeah.
one of them movies that's just gonna do fucking harebrained shit from beginning to end." So, again, I'm almost gonna, like, Woodsboro retrospective this shit. I'm just gonna go scene by scene, but, like, we get to
Please,
uh,
man.
their, like, vacation home, and it's really funny because I think the first, like, 5 to 10 minutes of this movie plays like a good old family drama. Like, this movie could have just been a wacky drama about, like, some pesky neighbors at this, clubhouse for an hour and a half, and I would not have batted an eye at it. And I think when Peter's the first of the 2 young, boys that shows up at the house, he's asking for eggs, he's saying he's being sent by the neighbor, obviously giving off a weird, creepy vibe. And I think my assumption as a movie watcher, I'm like, I've seen home invasion films and things of this nature. I'm like, he's gonna take the eggs, he's gonna go. This is his like scouting mission, and he'll come back at night. Like they'll be sleeping and he'll break in. That's when like all hell breaks loose. And then he just stays there, and the movie's going. I'm like, it's like 10 minutes have passed, he hasn't left, and I'm like, we're getting close to like the second act here, and we haven't
Yeah.
really gotten to where I thought we'd be yet. And obviously it's like this slow escalation with him and Naomi Watts where they have this back and forth. She gives him the eggs, he takes them, he cracks them. He's being annoying as shit. They do a
Yeah,
great job at like getting under your skin as the audience in a very different way than Watcher does. Because like at the 20-minute mark, he's pissing me off. I'm like, can we fucking move on? I'm like, give him the
dude.
eggs, tell him to get out of your house. Uh, which she does eventually get to. It his all of his like weird little fucking puzzle logic games where he's like, "Oh, you gave me 4 eggs. There's 12. You give me another 4. You
You
still have
must
4
have more,
left."
and you're going shopping on
Yeah,
Monday, so you have to give me
yes.
some.
And it's like the writing there is so good because I'm like, and maybe it's just a house I grew up in, but I'm like, you're not in the position of power here. You don't get to like apply the logic and be like, oh,
That's the whole thing.
here's
Yeah.
why you need to give me your stuff. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. It doesn't matter. She has a million eggs. Like, get the hell out of my house. And then of course he eventually leaves. I breathe a sigh of relief. And then you, of course, you hear the dog barking, and you already know what's coming next.
Yeah.
He comes back to the house. Now he's with his for some reason I'm blanking. Are they brothers or friends?
See,
They're
that's the thing with this movie. They play a lot with their lore and their backstory and
yeah, they
dynamic
do.
also.
They do.
Yeah. They're
Well,
assumed to be friends. Let's assume they're friends. Let's just assume they're friends, despite their similarities in look and everything as well.
yeah, they genuinely look like they could be brothers. But yes,
Easily.
Peter shows back up again, this time with Paul, who is
And
a
Paul is
bit
like the biggest agent of chaos in this movie, honestly.
he is clearly like the ringleader of their operation.
Yeah.
Shows back up, they're like, "Hey, I'm scared of dogs. Your dog made me drop the eggs. You got 4 more. Give me some more." And at this point, I'm like
Oh man.
losing my mind in my chair watching the film. And we get to a point where she's like, "You both need to get the hell out." And again, they're still doing that weird power dynamic thing where they're like, "Oh, like explain to us why. Like, why do you want us to leave your house? Like, make this make sense." And I'm like, "That's not how this works when you're in somebody
Yes.
else's house asking for their shit." And then the husband, Tim Roth, finally comes home. And again, breathe a sigh of relief because I'm like, all right, great. Man of the house, he's gonna like put the fucking foot down and end all this
He's the
shit.
captain. He's the captain of the
Yes,
ship. They keep telling him that
yes,
too.
he's the captain. And then they do he does the thing where he's like trying to like both sides of the shit where he's like, all right, let's all slow down here and figure out what's going on. And I'm like, I paused the movie. I'm like, no, 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 no.
Absolutely not Tim Roth.
As I'm like, as a man, as a husband, a significant other, you come home, your wife is in the living room with 2 young men you've never seen before. clearly hysterical or in a severe
Yeah,
state of emotions and is begging you to tell them to leave, and you want to get both sides before you ask questions. I was like, you should be swinging. You should be
dude,
swinging on these dudes.
get those golf
Uh,
clubs, bro.
I'm like, what the fuck is the matter with you, Tim Roth? I'm like, and again, this is like the most upset I've been watching a movie for this damn channel. And I'm like, what are we doing
Yeah,
here? We're at
yeah.
the 30-minute mark. I'm like, somebody should be like fighting right now. Uh, and again, eventually, Naomi Watts like storms out. Tim Roth's still going back and forth with these dudes. I forget what they say to him. Some smart shit. He slaps Paul.
Oh yeah, I
And,
have the line written somewhere
oh,
here.
please, please.
He tells him like, "You need to get out of my house, young man." And then Paul goes, "You better be careful, old man, before I break your eggs." And then he gets
Yeah,
slapped across the face by
dude.
Tim Roth.
What? As much as I hate his fucking character, dude,
He's
I
got
have to
some
give a shout.
lines, dude. He's
Michael
got some
Pitt,
lines, dude. Michael Pitt's got
his
some lines in this.
his delivery, the way they talk, it's not a foreign accent, but it almost sounds like one. It's a very light, airy way of speaking. Like you just say, it's like, "Or I'll break your eggs," or they just
Yeah,
like they sound like they're performing in a stage play, like they're just in a different movie, but it works for some reason. And when he
yeah.
slaps him again, I'm like, "Yeah, little bitch boy." I'm like, "Yeah, take that
Get
shit,
it,
you little
bro.
son of a bitch." At the same time, in my head, I'm like, "You have sealed your fate, Tim Roth.
This is
You
where it
doing that?"
all goes
Yeah.
wrong.
And then, of course, he's still got the golf club. We haven't even mentioned the whole let me take the golf club out to practice my
Woo.
swings with it,
Yep.
and
Yep.
then
Yep. Yep.
the convenient whimper from the dog where that's like obviously we know where that's going. Um, and then they just whack the shit out of Tim Roth's leg with that golf club,
Yep.
clearly breaking something. The son who we haven't mentioned yet, Georgie, very young, comes running in. Now the movie's like get to that heightened state that it never comes down from, really,
No.
not
Yeah.
truly.
No.
Uh, Obviously, Naomi Watts is coming back, losing her mind. I've recounted enough of this movie at this point. I'm curious for you at this point. We've cleared the first act. What are your thoughts on the movie up to this point? How are you
I
feeling
mean,
about how they set all this up?
dude. I mean, I love that you did that. I would hope that we're gonna continue to do that as we break down this movie and what it means and everything. Because rewatching it this time, I truly forgot how detailed and how quick this movie starts from the very beginning, where they're pulling up to their neighborhood and you see them both hanging out with their neighbors, and you don't really know what's going on. You just see them in the yard, but as you're watching, you realize, oh my
Mhm,
god, they played the game too. Especially when the son starts going, where's my friend, their daughter, she's gone, where is she? And lo and behold, their night takes the exact same sequence of events going forward, and it becomes like this rabbit hole, endless cycle of violence in isolation from the world. And like you said, dude, I think Michael Pitt truly, because I've seen both versions, and I think the thing that really pushes this version over the edge for me is Michael Pitt. And honestly,
mhm,
Tim Roth, Naomi Watts, and especially the child too, he is phenomenal in this movie. But the Brady Corbett Michael Pitt dynamic of their polite power plays, essentially, because they're never like forthright rude. They're beating around the bush of being rude constantly and like teetering that fine line of like social normity where they're saying please and thank you and doing this and that and the other thing. But what they're doing is so barbaric the whole time.
yeah,
And like you mentioned, dude, the scene where Brady Corbett is like fumbling with the eggs is like agonizing, especially after like she starts packing them for a little bit. She has this moment of realization where she's like, how'd you get in here? Like, how are you in my
yeah,
house? And he's like,
yeah.
oh, I took, down by the lake. And he's like, oh, Frank showed me, the neighbor. And it's like, okay, yeah. And you could tell like all these people in this community, like we meet their other neighbors later, like are all very close seemingly
Mhm,
during this time when they all travel out here. So it doesn't seem super out of the question for these two guys to be hanging out with their neighbors and be like, oh, we're just gonna bring them back so she can bake something. And like you said, the spiral of that when now Paul comes and he's like, "Oh, let me try out your husband's club. May I please, please?" And he goes out there. We don't see it happen. Once again, almost I won't say none, but almost all of the critically violent moments are never seen really. We just see the ramifications of such. And
mhm.
like you said, they beat up Tim Roth. They throw them down and everything, and then he makes Naomi Watts play hot and cold to find the dog. And this is another one of those. moments in the movie where it switches again and you're like, wait, what the fuck is happening? Because this is like the first like small fourth wall break without him like saying anything, where she's looking for the dog and she like walks behind a bush, that he turns at the camera and just smiles and laughs, and he turns around and he keeps playing the game with her until like the trunk opens and the dog's body is there. And it's like, wait, what? Like, are we in on this with them? Like, what is this? So let me ask you, that first fourth wall break, what was your thought when that happened? Or did it even click? Because I've shown this to people and they were like, they didn't realize it until he literally started talking to the camera and being like, what do you think? What's going on?
I have to be honest, that didn't click. When I was watching when they were doing warm
Mhm.
recording turns, I do remember him turning and giggling. I guess I don't know, maybe my brain has been poisoned by shit like Deadpool, where I'm expecting fourth wall breaks to be full on "Hi, audience member," but,
Yeah,
like,
that's a thing now that is
I
just normal too, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, I think that my brain was so scattered trying to keep up with this movie at that point that that wasn't even something I read. So I did think back to it though. Later on when I got it,
Mhm.
I was like, they've been doing this shit the whole movie. I'm glad you brought that specific scene where they play warmer, colder, with the dead dogs. Obviously, we know the dog's dead at this point. They do
Of
you hear
course.
the dog cry out
Yeah.
earlier. He even teases like, "Oh, guess what? I tested the base or
Yeah. It's
the club
horrible.
one." But I didn't think they would show the dog's a fucking dead body. Like I assumed he would turn a corner, scream, cut to next scene.
Yeah.
Opens the door and it just lifelessly just falls out of the back of the truck. I'm like,
Dude.
you motherfucker, what is wrong with you people?
Yeah,
What
and
is
that's
wrong
like
with you?
the first moment of like visceral violence. Because even like the Tim Roth thing, like after that point, he gets hit with the club. The worst thing that we're shown that is happening is like him getting kicked in the leg, essentially, for like 90
Yeah,
more minutes of this movie, you know? So that moment of the dog falling out is just like the big realization that these people are in for trouble, and she's brought back into the house, and that's when the idea of this bet comes along. By
oh my
9
god.
a.m. they can live. If by 9 a.m. they can live, they can go or whatever. But the two gentlemen that have captured them think the opposite and think that they will be dead by 9 a.m. And once again, this kind of spins onto itself when you realize that their neighbors were playing this game just this morning, and that's why they are nowhere to be found now. Um, and once again, dude, I mean, I think this second act is probably the slowest portion of the movie, but the one that is the most uncomfortable and unnerving also. And I think a scene we should start talking about is the stripping scene and how it's shot and handled, because it is so, I mean, anytime that happens in a movie, obviously it's horrific, but the way
Right.
that they do it here without showing an ounce of Naomi Watts' body makes it infinitely worse somehow. And you are just seeing the leers of these men on her and the way they are talking about her as if she is not even in the room. They're like, she doesn't have jelly rolls. Come on, prove
Yeah.
it. Take it
They say
off.
jelly rolls like 20 times in the scene, which is insane. And yeah, as soon as they get to they start like talking about her body, I instantly know where this is going. And my
Yeah.
brain is going to like the worst possible outcome because at this point in the movie, they've already shown you these people are fully effed up. They're
Oh, completely.
killers. They're super disturbed. They will do whatever to mess with these people. So I'm already thinking, I'm like, please, let's not lean heavily to sexual violence
Yeah.
in this film because I'm convinced that's where this is going at that point. Which I think the movie wants you to be afraid of in that moment. They want you to think like
Definitely.
something really bad's about to happen in front of Tim Roth and his son, and even like them making him tell her to take her clothes off. Like they don't tell her to do it. They're like, tell her, say, take your clothes off, babe. And he's like, take your
Yeah.
clothes off. They're like, take your clothes off, babe, and
Yeah.
they
So
make him say it
fucking
again.
horrifying, bro.
It's
Horrifying.
just
And then
so
yeah.
disturbing. Yeah.
And I think the thing about it immediately when you realize when the scene's over too is because immediately when she takes her clothes off, it's less than like 2 seconds later, he's like, okay, put your clothes back on. And this
Yeah.
is just part of their game. This isn't even like sexually like gratifying to their sick minds. This
No.
is just a game to them, another layer
Mhm.
to the game. And even when they're like sharing their backstories prior to this moment, I mean, I
I
mean,
just
this scene is so fucked up. Like,
I just call it's such obviously bullshit that they're spewing everything they say.
yeah,
One, Paul calling Peter two different names. He was calling them Peter and Tom. They don't
yeah,
acknowledge it for almost the entire movie. And I'm like,
yeah,
fine. I'm like, sure, fine, whatever. And then that bullshit ass backstory where he's like, He's like, "Yeah, we rob rich, like, snobby families." I was like, "No, you fucking don't." I'm like,
Yeah,
"No, you
no.
don't. You could have robbed these people 2 hours ago and moved on." I'm like,
And
"That's
then,
clearly
I
not all
mean,
you're in it for."
no, and then the whole time he's going on about, he calls him Tubby also as well
Oh,
a lot
yeah.
throughout this movie. He goes on talking about how he's like, this dude gets raped by his mom all the time, and that's why he's
Yeah.
the way that he is. And he starts bawling. I mean, Brady Corbett in this scene is killing. He starts bawling. He's like, shut up, that's not true. And then 2 seconds later, he goes, actually, he's just some spoiled rich kid who likes to have fun doing this kind of stuff. And he starts laughing. And you're sitting there
Yeah.
like, what is this, dude? Like,
And
what
I'm
is
I'm
happening?
starting to believe
Why
it
are they
when you
doing
say all
this?
this. I'm thinking, "Oh, we're finally peeling back the layers on these characters." I'm like, "Okay, I'm getting some
Yeah,
backstory."
no.
And they're like, "No, that's not really what it is. We're just fucking with you." And this is also the scene you mentioned the fourth wall breaks where they're
Yes, this
talking
is it
about
right
the
here.
bet, and Paul turns to the camera and he's like, "What do you think? Oh, you're probably on their side, right?" And I'm watching the movie. I like look over my shoulder. I'm like, "What the hell?" I pause the movie. I write my notes. I'm like, "Did he just ask me what I think?"
Yeah.
I'm like, and to I naively thought that was the most absurd fourth wall
Oh,
break this movie
no.
would have.
Oh, no, 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 no.
So naively, I believe that, but just no, I have some notes in all caps at the end towards the end of this film.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just disturbing. Should mention Georgie in this scene, played by Devin Gerhardt, who I have to shout out was in
Ooh.
the 2009 movie Shorts, which I feel like is a movie I only know
Mm,
exists. Side note, but like he's great. He plays the distressed child very well. The crying, screaming. You feel bad for him. He's constantly
absolutely.
begging for help. You feel bad for the parents who are helpless because the killers engage with him, where they're like, "Oh, do you want to like do a little game? Like, come over here. Let's put the little bag over your head." And them screaming and obviously helpless to do anything about it. Just deeply, deeply fucked up scene. That whole living room sequence, which
Yeah.
never ends. It's like the whole movie they're in that living room,
Yeah.
but
And the
goddamn.
longest shots too. I mean, that you are for, and we're gonna get into like the famous long shot from this movie in a little bit here. But
Oh
I mean,
god, yeah.
there are some shots in here that last an eternity, and essentially nothing. Either nothing is happening, or it's just dialogue, and you're just
Mhm.
stuck in the discomfort with them. And this is not something I usually point out or notice too much in films, especially to this level. But
Yep.
the makeup on their eyes, dude. The swollen eye makeup for their
Yeah.
crying is done so well in this movie. I mean, Tim Roth looks like he's been through utter hell by the end of this thing, man. Like he looks horrible, man. Horrible, horrible. And anyone would given this circumstance, but I'm glad that they did not, despite the movie being filmed in America, I'm glad that they did not, I guess, wimp out for lack of a better word and kind of succumb to general public and how we would perceive a movie like this. And it never really does. Like I said, it's a shot for shot remake of that original film. And I think the commentary of the lack of audience satisfaction, quote unquote, from like violence and the idea of this, is this really entertaining or is it just barbaric, and
Mhm.
it playing out in that way, I feel like it just serves so much more of a purpose having the American subtext behind the whole thing, despite Naomi Watts and Tim Roth obviously not being American in
Yeah.
saying that though.
Yeah, they do some fascinating stuff in this movie. Again, at this point, like I'm liking the movie. I don't dislike it, but I'm like, man, this is a deeply disturbing experience. And I
Yeah,
think, correct me if I'm wrong, the next set piece is when the son goes out, he goes running. He almost like
he
escapes the house.
escapes. Yeah, he escapes
He
the
manages
house.
to
He
get
goes to the
out.
neighbor's place.
Yeah, he's
Oof.
obviously desperate. Paul's hot on his trails. You can hear him calling out to him. Uh, you know Paul's gonna fucking catch up to this
Oh,
kid. There's too much
absolutely.
time left in the movie. But he's going through there, and then this is where like the story starts to unravel a bit because you see that
Yes.
neighbor's dead. You see like the dead body laying in the doorway. You're like, okay, this is bigger than just this one family here.
Yeah.
If you didn't already suspect that from the clues earlier in the film, but yeah, I think once I saw that, I was like, yeah, nobody's making it out of this movie. I was
There's
like,
not a
there.
soul is escaping.
I was like, Naomi Watts is not going to be the final girl and kill both of these guys and like walk away at the end of this movie. I was like, I don't think anyone's getting out of here, um, including poor Devin Gearhart here as Georgie, who has quite the run for the remainder of his runtime in this movie. Obviously hiding and whatnot, and then
Yep.
eventually getting the gun and coming face to face with Paul,
Yep.
where he's just telling him, he's like, yeah, pull the trigger. It's like, yeah,
Just shoot
like,
me. Yeah, just shoot me
yeah. It's
right
like
now.
right over here. Just, I'm like, dude, this is fucking. comic book villain,
I
man.
mean, not to mention
Uh,
too, like moments before. I mean, one, the shot of Georgie like getting into the house, and he just sees like the white. It's such an unusual silhouette because usually we see shadows in movies, but this is like a pure like white silhouette walking in the darkness, like
yeah,
just lightly jogging. Come on, Georgie, where are you going? And then when he gets in the house and Georgie is hiding, he goes, "Okay, hold on. Let me play a song." And it's that song from the intro with the screaming again. And you're
yeah,
just sitting there like, "Why the fuck is this happening, man?" And then I think that's the moment on my rewatch that I realized this is not a movie. We're watching a movie made by these two guys essentially. This is their movie.
yeah,
and
yeah.
and we're stuck in it now. And they don't lose, okay? And that's just the
Mhm.
situation and we're going to watch it unfold. And yeah, I mean the scene where they get back to the house. I mean, this is probably now the most iconic and disturbing scene from this movie, the eeny meeny miny mo.
Yeah, we're playing the game, and again, even the two gentlemen here can't agree on what the rules are. You know, remember there's some confusion on their part where they're counting. You know, like, oh, they're gonna kill someone here, and they do it. Then it lands on Georgie. Then we like hear a struggle. We don't really see exactly what's going
Yep.
on. Gun goes off.
Boom.
We hear some more screaming, and I'm trying to like make out at that point. I'm like, wait, okay, I'm trying to hear who's screaming because I want to know who's alive. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I hear Naomi Watts. I'm like, okay, Tim Ross probably dead then. Um, and then it's just the shot of the bloody television, and it's
Yep.
just like it's playing
It's like the Daytona,
the
bro. It's like
race. Yeah,
NASCAR.
Daytona. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think they're like
Which is
Talladega.
another
I
like
don't know.
layer of commentary on it that there's just like this endlessly like cycle of a thing, like
Yeah.
just going around
Mhm.
and around in a circle over and over again.
Full commentary. They play that broadcast like unbroken for like 9
Oh
minutes.
yeah, yeah,
Blood running down the TV, blood on the wall, and then that's like shot as haunting. But the real doozy is when they cut to the
oof,
wide, and that's where they confirm what you feared most,
yeah,
because you see Naomi Watts alive, intact, and Tim Roth alive, intact,
yeah,
which leaves Georgie, whose body you can see up to like his shoulders
yeah,
on the ground, covered in blood. They fucking killed the kid of all people in this movie, and
yeah,
I'm like, we have gone so far off the deep end
yeah.
at this point.
And then they
Um,
leave. They leave the house at that point. The two
yeah,
dudes leave the house, and you're just sitting there watching Naomi Watts. She like hops over to the TV, turns it off, and you see his body, like you just said. She hops over to Tim Roth and she's trying to break him loose, and we're just sitting there watching this family's life fall apart for like what'd you say, like 8, 9 minutes of an
yeah,
unbroken take. And I think that is one of the most I mean, it's an agonizing scene to watch, both from like
mhm,
a quote unquote entertainment once again standpoint, and then just from an emotional standpoint. This is
mhm,
just literally the worst thing that could happen. And the movie is playing it obviously completely straight, but completely unbroken and also
yeah.
distant too. Like we're watching them from far away. We're not even like in the moment with them really. We're just like a spectator of this horror. And it's oof, it just plays so disgusting.
They do not let you out of that moment. They keep you in there for as long as possible. I was watching, I was really fascinated by the decision to like, so obviously when the shot goes off, we get the screams, the initial reaction shouts, but like they get quiet really fast. And even during that whole unbroken take, I was waiting for the like Tony Collette hereditary moment where
Yeah.
like Naomi Watts just explodes into hysteria. Obviously, just watch their son get fucking blasted to death in front of her, and then it never really comes, not in that moment. Like her and Tim Roth, they are both awake and conscious still, and neither of them have
Yeah.
that outcry of "I just watched my child be murdered in front of me,"
Yeah.
which was obviously a writing and directing choice not to do that, which I thought was really interesting. It probably contributes to the uneasiness, I guess. But yeah, just that whole run of them. I should mention at this point, like Naomi Watts, still not like fully clothed at this
Yeah.
moment as she's
Just
hobbling
hopping around.
around. Um, Getting Tim Roth out of there, and then I think they even say to each other, like, "We gotta, like, get out of here, like, they might come back."
Now, yeah.
Which created a fascinating, little game in my mind because 'cause I'm like, "I wonder, do they come back?" Like, at
Yeah,
that
there's
point in the
about like
movie, I'm
30
like,
minutes left and at this
"Yeah."
point, and it's like, okay, how is this actually wrapped now? Yeah.
I'm like, I could see that being their exit because this movie's just messed up enough to make that be their exit stage
Their
right.
swan song, yeah.
But yeah, but then like the runtime, like you said, 30 minutes. I'm like, I feel like there's just too much time left in this movie for there to not be one last hoorah here. So yeah, we get the painful Tim Roth's still in the chair. He's scooting around. Naomi wants to get to the kitchen again. Then we get the
Cell
call back
phone.
to the cell phone in the beginning, which I knew that was going to come back when he knocks it
Yeah.
into the sink. It's 2007. So they've got these shitty flip phones because they didn't buy an iPhone yet, despite how rich they are.
Yep.
Um,
Game over.
yeah, they're trying to use the landline to call for help. Signals screwed. They're having their moment together where he's like, "You've got to get out of here," because she's like in a better shape than he is. His
Yeah.
body's mangled.
And
He
that's
can
like
barely
where
move.
finally like the emotional outburst happens. Like after she gets clothed and
Yeah.
everything, she's about to climb out of the window, and he's just like, "I'm sorry," and they just both like completely break down.
Mhm.
She's like, "This is probably the last time I'm gonna see my husband. He's probably gonna die
Yeah.
here somehow."
Yeah. And she leaves. We cut back to him more trying to get the police. Eventually, he
Yeah.
does. Kind of signals bad. He can't tell if they hear him or not. He's not getting an answer. Very frustrating. And God, this scene with Naomi
Oof.
Watts out in the street, where again, I love it when a movie takes sets up a trope or an expectation where they're like, if you've ever watched a movie, you know how this goes. You know that the person's looking for help. They wave down a car. You think it's going to be some sort of solace, and then it's the bad guys. And there's a car, and Naomi Watts is the smart movie character. She's like, no, she lets it go by, and then it goes by, and she's like, shit, I should have flagged that car down. If she
Yeah.
tries to get it and it's already gone, it's nighttime, they don't see her, that car's gone. Then another car comes. And that's when I'm like, that's when all the dread just washes over me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh God. I was like, no,
So
no,
close.
no, no,
So
no,
close.
no, no. Because you know it's coming. And
Yeah.
she waves the car down. And I love that they don't even show you who's in it because they don't need to.
They
You
don't
know
need
who's in the
to.
goddamn car. You
Yeah.
know who it is. She waves the car down. We cut back to Tim Roth, still struggling, trying to get help.
Oh
And then
man, this shot right here is just fucking like one of
dude,
my favorite shots in any horror movie. Probably this shot right here that
dude,
you're about to talk about.
yes. He's in the house.
Oh my
Hears
god.
like commotion and voices. He calls out to Naomi Watts, like, "Is that you, honey?" And then you hear the door open, and you just hear a small little golf ball rolling on the floor. And we
Dude.
didn't mention it earlier, but obviously they had the golf ball because they were fucking
Mm,
around at the clubs,
yeah.
and it just rolls into frame past the door. And that is like, has there ever been a more helpless shot in a horror
Yeah.
movie, dude?
Tim Roth's sitting there crippled, just like single tear.
Yeah,
It's
and it's just
over.
like it confirms obviously what we as the audience already know. They're back. They were the ones in the car. They took Naomi Watts, brought her back to the house,
Mhm.
and they are here to most likely finish the job. And
Yeah.
then this Paul creeps in the shot like Willy Wonka, hopping and stepping in. Just like, hey, blah blah blah. They came back. Naomi Watts has obviously been bound, and from here on out, at this point, I'm just like, can we just get this over with? I'm like,
Yeah.
just kill these people and move on. I'm thinking in my head back to him being like, "We robbed like rich assholes," and I'm just like, these guys are the worst.
Yeah.
And we get some more back and forth for them talking their shit, being weirdos, and then we get to the scene back in the living
This
room
oh baby.
where Tim,
This is the scene now. Other than like that 9-minute long take, this is the scene.
the gun, the long ass hunting rifles on the table.
Yep. And he's
Um,
like explaining the rules again, like he's done the
yeah,
entire movie, like nothing out of the ordinary, you know?
uh huh. Yeah, Tim Roth's on the ground here. Peter slash Tom is standing up there, and then so I believe the way it plays out the first time, I might be misremembering, is Paul grabs the gun and shoots Tim Roth on the ground,
Yeah.
right? And then wait, no, because she goes for the gun.
Yeah, she goes
She
for it
yeah,
first,
she goes for
and
it
then
first. she takes the gun, shoots Peter, blasts him through.
And the shot is so, like, strangely edited too, where it's almost like
It
that
is.
wasn't supposed to happen, you know what I mean? Like, he gets shot, and then it's another shot of a wall, and then his body just, like, completely
Yeah.
boom, just, like, hurling against the wall and death immediately.
Yeah, like, they just had him hooked up to, like, a zip line and threw him into the wall. And then, again, like I said earlier, when I thought the fourth wall breaking, this couldn't get any crazier, Paul just grabs the remote and rewinds, to which I'm thinking of the movie Click, starring Adam Sandler.
Literally.
I'm like, "Am I
He clicks
watching
her, bro.
Click?" He rewinds, like, 45 seconds to before she can get the gun and get the jump on them, and then he just
Yep.
takes it.
He just grabs
And
it,
then
hits her, and it's like, "That's up." That's
then
up.
we were just like, "What the fuck?" It's like, "You just read my mind." Uh, Shoots Tim Roth just very mercilessly, just blasts him away. At that point, I'm like, "Mercy, just let him out of his misery."
Yeah,
At
please.
that
He
point for
he
poor
he
Tim
needed to
Roth.
die at that point, man. Poor guy.
Yeah, and then now it's just them and Naomi Watts, and at this point, it's not even a question of if, it's just how. It's just how and when. I'm like, "What are they gonna do with this woman?"
And how is just so, like,
Oh,
depressing in itself as well.
somehow, dude, in some stick twisted way, she might get the worst death of all of them. I don't
Yeah,
know how they managed to do it.
yeah,
Because the other two, as fucked up as it is, they just get shot and killed, dead instantly. But
yeah.
at this point, they've gone through this so long that it's morning now. The sun is rising.
Yep, the next
Uh,
day.
yeah, she takes them, or he takes the two gentlemen take her out onto the boat that we've seen. They talked about the boat, captain, whatnot. She's tied up on it, mouth uh, gagged, and they're just like having a good old morning conversation, just talking about random miscellaneous shit, having a mundane conversation. I think she makes one more attempt to try to like break out of her binds. They like laugh off, like, "Oh, look at the like the heart, the courage, blah blah blah." And then they're talking about like their plans, and then eventually Paul's just like, "Well, okay," and then he just pushes her off the boat into the
Yep.
water, and
In a
she's
single take, it
tied.
doesn't show her ever, like, ever again, like, that's it.
No,
She just falls
you
off the
don't
boat.
see her. You don't see her struggling. There's no shot of her underwater squirming. They don't show air bubbles coming up from
Nope,
underwater. They just
nope.
push her off the boat and like keep riding. It's like, well, she drowned.
And then Peter's
She
like, "Ah,
drowned.
you did it too early."
Just, just it's one of the worst ways you can die. Just so nonchalantly brought upon this woman.
They coulda cared
Uh,
less, honestly, yeah.
yeah,
Horrifying.
just completely awful. And of course, they ride their boats on this
Oh,
cloudy morning to a dock to their other neighbor. Goes up to the back of the to her door, knocks, and at this point, you're essentially watching the beginning of another movie because they're
yeah.
about to go on the
Funny Games
third
too.
chain. Yeah, third chain that we know of. They ask this woman for some eggs, and she's like, "Yeah, I'll go check or whatever." And that's how that movie ends. And
Yeah,
obviously, the rest is implied.
yeah, he looks up at the camera, smiles, and then they play that song again, the screamy metal song, and that's how it
The
ends.
third time.
Yeah, this is, I mean, okay, before we even, like, give our rating and stuff, I mean, what was your feeling on the fourth wall breaking, but especially, I guess, the remote control scene?
You know, I thought the fourth wall breaks were like weird, interesting choices. I think any time that a movie that's not like a screwball comedy is breaking the fourth wall,
Yeah,
I'm like, we're in dangerous territory here because it's just like just goes against everything we know about
yeah,
watching a movie, right? So I'm like, if you're doing it, it's got to be worth it. And I think that it's effective at being jarring at first. And I did have a thought where he does the remote rewind that I'm like, we have so greatly jumped the shark, just like far
absolutely.
beyond. We've jumped
Yeah,
the shark and then like off the face of the earth into space. Because and I think that was obviously the intent. That's not meant to be a grounded thing that happens in the movie. Um,
mhm,
it adds to the again the sense of like doom where it was like there was no like outcome that was positive for this family. Like I know
yeah,
in the beginning I give them shit for how they handled the initial interaction and engagement with them, but the truth of the matter is like from the moment they got to that house and Peter and Paul showed up, like there was no way out for them. Like even
yeah,
from the eggs, like there was nothing they were gonna do. Like they were gonna do what they were gonna do to those people, no matter how they handled it. So I think that moment kind of just drives that point home. It was an interesting choice artistically, uh, but Yeah, I don't know. Those are my thoughts on the matter there.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely like this. Unlike Watcher, I think it has the opposite effect. Where like the first time I watched it, I was okay on it. I liked it, but I wasn't super hot on it. And I think the more times I've thought about and revisited this movie, it's grown on me exponentially more as it just feels so much smarter than movies that I'm personally used to watching, especially of this genre. And I think the same thing
Mhm,
with Watcher, the same positive I can give that movie for the long stretch of time that I really liked it is that it doesn't feel like a normal stalker movie. This does not feel like a normal home invasion movie, despite how much it leans into that constantly. And
mhm.
obviously, you and I came together because of Scream. And I think in the same way, Funny Games has just this giant meta commentary on just audience and audience expectation and the way we like to view movies and the way we like movies to go. And sadly, it is not always that way. So it's not a movie that I easily recommend and throw out there, but I am glad that you liked it, my friend. I am glad.
Yeah, it is, very well done. It is
Yeah.
a good movie. It's funny, I watched this in another buddy of mine who watches a lot of movies. I recommended it to him, and as I was describing the movie, he's like, "Wait, I think I've seen that movie before." And he's like, "Yeah, and they do this, and they kill the son, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "You watch this movie? You watch this?"
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, uh, just a nuts film.
Absolutely nuts. Well, let me ask you, are you planning on checking out the original at any point?
Want to at some point. I think halfway through this, I was like, please. I'm like, I don't. It's like I don't know if I want to do this again, but older.
Totally. Totally.
But older, but with British accents. I really don't know. But I think I have liked the more I've thought about it, I've been like, I do kind of want to see how they did the original. I do want to go back and check.
Mhm.
So I probably will go cross reference at some point.
Yeah.
But
Not the
yeah,
top of the watch list for sure. Understandable, dude. And even in saying that, like I said earlier, like the reason I picked US is because I do think the commentary works better in this subtext. I also think the performances are just really good. Not to knock on that original as well. They're doing a great job. But I think, I mean, Tim Roth selling those cries and just the child acting in this, I think is all across the board just so good. And Michael Haneke, thank you for saying fuck you to American audiences and giving us this movie, man.
yeah, sure, yeah.
So, what are you gonna give this one, man? What are you gonna give Funny Games as we wrap up here?
Yeah, it's funny because I think when I watched it and reviewed it on Letterbox, I think I gave it a 3.5 stars, which would be a 7 out of 10. And I don't
Mhm.
disagree with that assessment, but I do think the more I've thought about it, it has been a while. I watched it over a week ago at this point. Since I've watched it and thought about it, it's grown on me a little bit. I might creep that up to like a 4, 4, 8,
Yeah.
4 stars, 8 out of 10 territory.
Yeah, this one is it's still 4.5, a 9 out of 10 for me. It's probably going to stay that way. There's just I mean, once again, like it is just not a fun movie at all, really. So it's hard for me to give something a 10 if I'm not extremely emotional invested, and despite that being the point, it's
Mhm.
like it's just so bleak, man. That 9-minute scene is so well done, but just so much of the runtime is spent just feeling sorrow that it's hard for me to be like, oh yeah, 10, you know. So yeah, definitely a great movie.
Yeah.
Love the performances. The original, also a good movie. And I do want to give credit to the original too. I mean, to think that in the 90s they did those fourth wall breaking moments, I cannot imagine what that must have been like to see that for the first time. That must have been fucking nuts. So give Michael that
Yeah.
as well.
It's quite barnacles, and yeah, I think just to kind of sum up my thoughts, two movies that I like quite a bit. I think they both achieve what they're trying to do very
Mhm.
well. Both movies that get under your skin in very different ways and take
Yeah.
very different paths to get there. One definitely more conventional than the other, but goodness, these are both movies that like if I know someone that likes a thriller or any sort of like anxiety-inducing film, and they tell me they haven't seen them, probably instant recommend for either for me. So
Mm.
yeah, good round. I think this is
Yeah,
another
I think
solid
this
movie
was
trade.
this was a really good one. Yeah, I feel the same as you. Like I said, I obviously liked Funny Games more, but I think they're both
Mhm,
really good movies to watch if you're getting into horror. In fact, I think like maybe doing Watcher as like the second, third, or first movie in your slasher or horror-a-thon and ending your horror-a-thon with Funny Games is probably the best way to do it to kind of just commentate on on everything that you just witnessed. So yeah, loved this episode of Movie Trade. I'm gonna edit right now, my friend, but I'm gonna pause this too, and we can pick our movies if you're
Oh,
down with
right.
it.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can do that. Okay.
1 hour later.
And with that, as we close out this episode of the Movie Trade, we are gonna both inform each other of our next picks. Without further ado, Donovan, what is your pick, my friend?
I'm going to go with 2017's Brigsby Bear. That is gonna be
Wonderful.
my pick here.
Wonderful. Have not seen that movie. Have heard nothing but amazing things about it. I am very much so looking forward to it. This is going to be a historic moment for the show in a couple different ways. I'm going to not bury the lead. Beau Travail. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And if it's not right now, it'll be right by the next episode when we actually talk about this movie. But this is a movie I also haven't seen. And it's our first
Oh,
foreign film that we're talking about
okay.
on the
I'm
pod.
sorry.
So
Say the
this
title
is
for me.
yeah, and
Bo.
if I say this wrong, guys, please bear with me. Beau Travail or Travail. It's Bo
Okay.
as like Bo is afraid Bo, and then Travail. And the poster will be there for you guys to see it, so you can spell it out as well and watch it
Okay.
before our next episode. I've heard nothing but amazing things about this. It's Claire Denis joint from the '90s, and let's
Mm.
cross our fingers and hope it's good.
I'm crossing them, dude. I'm crossing them.
Yeah, but without further ado, thank you guys for coming on to another episode of the Movie Trade and enjoying our discussions here. This has been a blast once again. I hope the next round we continue with nothing but with good movies. We have yet to serve up a stinker on either end, so let's cross our fingers and hope. But with that being said, we will see you on the next one. Bye bye.